It is time. It's waiver wire time. Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. And that is Heath Cummings. It's Waiver Wire Tuesday. Hope LeBron James hasn't tried to trademark that one. But you know what? We're going to get you covered with all of your waiver wire needs, as well as plenty more on a loaded show here on a Tuesday. Recapping not one, but two Monday Night Football games, Broncos and Raiders. Texans and Saints. Lots of big fantasy implications coming out of those two ball games. Giving you all those waiver wire suggestions that you need. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, as well as Heath Cummings' favorite position, the kicker, and defense as well. Carson Palmer takes some time to join us here on FFT. And, of course, we're going to answer your questions. Send them to us, as always, at FF Today on Twitter. Our wonderful producer, Andrew Ballmer, says we're getting to at least 22 questions today, not 21, not 23, but 22 questions here on Tuesday, September 10th. So we had two games to look at last night. They were fun. One certainly more than the other in terms of the Saints and the Texans, but Raiders and Broncos had a lot of big fantasy implications. And go ahead, gentlemen. High five each other. Take your victory laps. Big night for the two of you guys. So no Antonio Brown for the Raiders, as you're well aware, and certainly if you listen to the crowd, they were not letting it go without talking about Antonio Brown. We will leave that for another show. In any event, Raiders beat the Broncos 24-16, and it was the coming out party for three players. Tyrell Williams showing us that he can be the number one guy there without Antonio Brown. Darren Waller showing us he could be the guy without Jared Cook. And Josh Jacobs showing us that he could be a very good fantasy running back. You see the receivers here. So Heath, I'll give you first word. Tyrell Williams, first touchdown for the Raiders, 6 for 105. And the score on 7 targets. You were hyping this guy up. I know you didn't expect it to be without Antonio Brown, but once we got the news that Brown was gone, here we go, the Tyrell Show.
Everything I was hoping for and then some. Williams, 7 targets, 60% of the Raiders' air yards in this game. He had another deep shot they just missed on. He beat Chris Harris on a post after he slipped at the line of scrimmage. Williams was fantastic. My favorite thing, though, because I already knew Tyrell Williams was a very talented wide receiver. He's shown us that for the last 5 years. My favorite thing was that Derek Carr went back to throwing the ball down the field, just like his head coach asked him to. And every time he threw it down the field, he was looking for Williams.
We talked about this on the podcast today. You weren't a part of the show, but Dave, myself, and Adam Mazer, their schedule gets a little bit tougher after this week's game against Kansas City. If he has another big game, which could happen easily because they're probably chasing points against the Chiefs, is he a sell-high candidate? Just given the stretch of games is really, really brutal.
It's just going to determine for me what the value is. I don't know how good he would have to be this week against the Chiefs.
Same thing. Let's just say 7 for 105 and a touchdown.
Does he have top 20 receiver value then? Because if he doesn't, I'm not selling.
Well, I think what people would look at him as, okay, number one guy. If you do play fantasy over the course of several years, we saw 2016 when Keenan Allen went down, which is really the only time. I mean, I know you say he's been good over 5 years, but that was the only time that
he's been good on a per target basis.
Sure,
yes.
that was the only time he had blow up fantasy numbers, and it was because he was the number one guy, which he is once again. So I think if he has another big game, I would try and sell high if you can, if you're getting something that is better than him in return. I know what you're saying, top 20 wide receiver value. Your turn, Mr. Richard. So Darren Waller comes out, 7 for 70, looked awesome, led the team in targets with 8. How excited were you?
At halftime, I was pretty excited. But in the second half, you saw the Broncos actually doing some scheming to take him away. They were worried about Darren Waller, and I don't know if they ever came up with an answer for Tyrell Williams, but they did come up with an answer for Waller. I loved the usage. 8 targets, and we know that Derek Carr only attempted 26 passes in the game, so that's good. Caught 7 of them. A lot of them were little short passes. That's what I was counting on with Darren Waller all along, is that when Derek Carr was dinking and dunking, Waller would take advantage. So I think that we've got a tight end now that can be a top 12 starter week in and week out. And maybe what I missed the boat on was just how much volume he'd get. And I think that that's a byproduct of Antonio Brown not being there, and it's going to make him even more valuable in PPR.
The one thing that surprised me in this game, and I think part of it was game script, but we talked about a lot this summer, is Josh Jacobs going to get those targets? Will Jalen Richard still get those targets? Well, Josh Jacobs got 1. Jalen Richard got 0. They just did not throw the ball to the running backs. I'll be surprised if that happens again this week against the Chiefs, where they actually fall behind. But we'll find out. If that's the case, then Waller's absolutely a top 7 or 8 tight end the rest of the way.
I think you're 100% right. And, you know, it's a position of need for a lot of fantasy players. Now, we did get some other great performances. TJ Hockenson, Mark Andrews, you know, guys that we've been talking about a lot over the course of the summer. All of them played very, very well. So if Waller is available, we're going to talk about him when we get to the tight end waivers. He should absolutely be added because, you know, I don't think you're going to start him necessarily over the poor performance of O.J. Howard. Maybe not yet. Could be in the conversation. Maybe over Hunter Henry, who had a bad game. Certainly not over Zach Ertz. I don't think he's at that point yet where you're benching those other guys. But it's nice to have them or have him if you do have some tight end issues. Austin Hooper also had a very good game, 9 for 77 for him. Josh Jacobs, though, was very nice to see it. And I'm glad you brought up what you said there, Heath, because playing with the lead versus chasing points. How will he do in the passing game? Will he be the guy if, in fact, they are chasing points against the Chiefs? That's what I'm curious to see. But an unbelievable debut from a fantasy perspective. 3.7 yards per carry, not the greatest number there, but a lot of that was some short yard situations as well. So 23 carries for 85 yards and the 2 touchdowns, like you said, 1 catch for 28 yards. Anybody that drafted him that was a little bit concerned about what's going to happen with Antonio Brown, forget about it. You're starting him. He is a solid number 2 fantasy running back with the chance to maybe crack the top 12 depending on what happens moving forward. For the Broncos side of things, it wasn't exactly pretty, but there were some things you could take from this if you are looking at it from a discovery standpoint. The running back situation, not great. So you have Royce Freeman, 10 carries for 56 yards. Phillip Lindsay, 11 carries for 43 yards. Lindsay was the one catching passes out of the backfield, 4 for 23. Dave, when you look at this backfield, what do you take from it?
The snaps were almost even. I think Phillip Lindsay only 4 more snaps played than Royce Freeman. I was worried that this was going to be a 3-headed monster coming into the season. Devontae Booker played only 1 snap. So I'm glad that it's only the 2 of them. And I just think it's going to be a matter of time before the Broncos realize Royce Freeman can't do what Phillip Lindsay can. So Phillip Lindsay will continue to get more and more of that share. I'm discouraged a little bit by the results in week 1. And I'm very worried about both of these guys in week 2 against Chicago. But if I've got Phillip Lindsay on my fantasy squad, I'm not hating it. I'm looking at him more so as a flex than a number 2 fantasy running back, but the time will come where you will be a number 2 runner.
The interesting thing is, Royce Freeman was viewed coming into last year as the better running back. He was the higher draft pick. All year, and especially this offseason, we've heard, well, Phillip Lindsay averaged 5.5 yards per carry. Royce Freeman was below 4 yards per carry. Lindsay's clearly better. In this game, Royce Freeman averages 5.6 yards per carry. Lindsay's at 3.9.
Right.
Freeman was clearly better in terms of production, in terms of
the one that
he had a huge run, and everything else was he had like 30 yards on.
I was actually a little bit. The carries went almost exactly like I expected they would. I was excited that there was no Devontae Booker. And if Phillip Lindsay gets 4 to 5 targets per week, I think he can still be a good low-end number 2 running back.
Yeah, just this is not a week to trust them going again. Matchup against the Bears is going to be pretty ugly for probably both these guys, unless, of course, they decide to feature one of the 2. Cortland Sutton with a strong game, 7 for 120. Emmanuel Sanders, 5 for 86. Both guys led the team in targets. Sutton with 8, Sanders with 7. Sanders, I don't think anything we have to say is going to change a lot. He's going to be a serviceable number 2, number 3 receiver. This was encouraging for him coming off of the Achilles tear from last season. Didn't really get going until the second half. But Cortland Sutton looked really, really good. You know, got the team off to a good start in terms of what their passing attack looked like. And again, you see here 7 for 120. So for those of us that were looking at Cortland Sutton and saying, okay, let's see how he does with Sanders, with Deshaun Hamilton. Hamilton was miserable, 2 for 5, dropped a touchdown that hit him right in the hands. Can you feel comfortable about Cortland Sutton? Again, not this week necessarily against the Bears, but moving forward.
I am much more optimistic about Sutton. He did some things.
They actually threw the ball, Heath.
They threw the ball well. It helps when they fall down 14-0 to the Raiders. I didn't expect that. But he actually looked like a wide receiver instead of somebody that just goes down the sideline and hopefully catches the long pass. My only concern is that I still don't think this Raiders defense is actually good. Joe Flacco looked awful for most of this game. And I'm just afraid when they play an average or above average defense, what does it look like then?
Oh, they're going to get destroyed this week.
Yeah.
Bears coming off a loss where they actually played well defensively against the Packers. I know it's on the road. I know they're facing Vic Fangio. I don't care. They're going to beat up Joe Flacco and beat him up probably pretty badly in this game. All right, that wraps up that first game, which was actually the second game. Let's move on to the more exciting of the 2 contests on Monday night between the Texans and the Saints. Saints getting a late field goal from Will Lutz to win the game, 30-28. Just an unbelievable finish, back and forth action on both sides, and really great fantasy performances all the way through. So let's start with the Saints and their running back situation here. You look at Alvin Kamara, nobody expected him to struggle. Had a dominant performance, 13 carries for 97 yards. Great in the passing game as well, 7 for 72 on 8 targets. playing like the star fantasy running back we expected him to be. Latavius Murray scored a touchdown. A little bit concerning, though, with the usage. Only 8 total touches. Now, I do think that if you look at it, first off, Taysom Hill was a little bit of a problem because some of those short yardage runs, they went to Taysom Hill. The other part of it is, I think if you look at it, I don't know if this is the case, but it felt like after the interception in the first half, which was on a target to Latavius Murray, they went away from him in the passing game. I don't know if it was his fault, he did something wrong, or just part of the game plan, but Dave, when you look at Latavius Murray, how do you feel about him coming out of this game?
I feel exactly the same way about him as I did on draft day, which is he's a great flex. He's a great running back to have on your bench.
But can he be a great flex with 8 touches?
No, not really. I mean, I thought he'd have a decent game. I thought he had a chance of scoring this game because I thought the Saints would have a big lead and that they'd run him a lot and he'd get an opportunity in short yardage. That didn't happen. He still found the end zone. I wasn't terribly surprised to see Alvin Kamara get 20 touches. I was happy about it. Got him in a lot of leagues. He was a first-round pick. That's a good thing. I think we could see a little bit more of Latavius Murray as they go on the road. They typically run a little bit more when they're on the road away from the Superdome, and in some games at the Superdome where they do have that big lead and he can get more work.
Yeah, this was more Alvin Kamara before Mark Ingram came back from suspension.
Absolutely.
Than it was after he came back. And if that's the case, Latavius Murray's in big-time trouble.
He played 18 snaps. That's also an issue. Only 3 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I don't think you're going to bail on Latavius Murray. The touchdown was certainly nice to see. 30-yard touchdown run. Longest run of the night for the Saints. Alvin Kamara had a 28-yard run. But, again, you'd like to see a little bit more work, a little bit more involvement in the passing game, maybe 3 to 4 catches, and, hopefully getting that number up to 10 carries. But averaging 7.2 yards per carry, big benefit from that 30-yard touchdown scamper. For the Texans, their backfield looked maybe a little bit surprising to those of us who were counting on Carlos Hyde to struggle. He looked great. 10 carries for 83 yards, 8.3 yards per carry, 1 catch for 2 yards on only 1 target. Duke Johnson had the better overall game with 9 carries for 57 yards and being more involved in the passing game with 4 catches for 33 yards on 5 targets. Heath, you look at this backfield and you say what?
I'm still not that interested in Carlos Hyde. It was a very good performance. He was very efficient, but when I look at it, like, let's say in an optimistic situation, we're going to say Carlos Hyde now, instead of averaging 3.6 yards per carry, he's going to average 4.6 yards per carry. If he's getting 10 carries and 1 catch per week, that's 46 yards, and you're praying he scores a touchdown. I'm not that excited about it. I was Duke Johnson played about 63% of the snaps. I'm more excited about the types of touches he's getting, and he was in there inside the 5. Duke was the running back on the field.
I want to tie in the 3 secondary running backs that we've talked about on the respective teams. Royce Freeman, Latavius Murray, Carlos Hyde. Because I think they're similar in certain regards. They're not going to be the lead rusher by any stretch, barring an injury. Certainly not Latavius, and again, I don't think over Duke Johnson, even though Carlos Hyde had more carries. What I mean by lead running back in terms of touches and who we would perceive to be the better of the 2. Is there a big difference, though, between these 3 guys, given if they're all touching the ball maybe 10 times? And I only ask this because I think we would all take Latavius Murray over Carlos Hyde and Royce Freeman.
Correct.
But what's the difference between Carlos Hyde and Royce Freeman, given the fact that the Texans' offense is going to be way better than the Broncos' offense?
I don't know if there's a huge difference other than I think the Texans are kind of pot committed to using Carlos Hyde until he absolutely breaks down, whereas I think the Broncos can probably limit Royce Freeman's workload.
But the workload should be the workload was exactly the same. Exactly the same.
And Royce Freeman was really good.
Freeman was pretty
Hyde
good.
was better.
Hyde was better, and he had more explosive runs. I've got the Texans schedule in front of me. I think this week is going to be very interesting for them because they've got Jacksonville at home.
Sure.
It should be a game that's game script is favorable for Carlos Hyde. But after that, I think you've got to go until week 7 when they play at Indianapolis, where you'll find a game where they're going to have a lead and they're going to grind down the clock with Carlos Hyde. So I wouldn't be too excited about Carlos Hyde either. I think we're going to see a lot more from Duke Johnson.
I don't, but I know how he feels about Royce Freeman. That's why I was asking.
Right.
It's like
those are both running backs.
I don't know how you can look at one and say situation is better. Talent, I think, is better for Royce Freeman.
I think Royce Freeman's talent is better. But I think it's more likely, and this could be wrong, I think it's more likely that the Broncos have more rushing touchdowns for their running backs this year.
Potentially. But again, offense would certainly favor the Texans. We don't need to say much about the quarterbacks. Both Deshaun Watson, Drew Brees were fantastic. DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, they were fantastic as the lead receivers on their respective teams. Any interest, though, in Ted Ginn, 7 for 101 on 7 targets, Kenny Stills, 3 for 37 and a touchdown on 3 targets. And then where do you stand on Will Fuller? I'll give you the Texans side of things. You take Ted Ginn.
This was scary for me for Will Fuller. Only 3 targets in this game, and we were hoping he'd get 6 or 7 a game, and that's just borderline in terms of turning into a top 30 wide receiver. He still had the good production. He always has that potential to give you a good fantasy day in just 1 catch. But the additional catches for Duke Johnson and the fact that Kenny Stills caught that touchdown makes me more concerned about Johnson being, or Will Fuller being a top 30 wide receiver.
And Ted Ginn teases us all the time with games like this. He'll have one great game, and then there's going to be 4 or 5 weeks where he's 5 for 50,
home versus
4
road.
for 40. It could be as simple as that. Next week they're on the road, they're outdoors on grass. I don't want to trust Ted Ginn. There are a slew of wide receivers that I like off waivers this week. Ted Ginn isn't toward the top of the list.
No, but I do think in deeper leagues, again, you saw his numbers last year. He was the second guy. A lot of people questioning Traquan Smith or Ted Ginn. Ted Ginn better than Jared Cook in terms of what his production was by far. So this is going to be a guy I think that they can still rely on, even though Traquan scored the touchdown. Ted Ginn, again, 3rd on the team in targets behind only Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. If you're buying into how Drew Brees is going to spread the ball around, I think Ted Ginn in deeper formats is someone you should consider. And maybe we'll talk about him when we get to the wide receiver waiver wire list. But first, we're going to talk about some running backs. A position of need with injuries to Joe Mixon, to Tevin Coleman, to Darius Geis. One guy that could be very good is potentially Ronald Jones or Giovani Bernard. Stay right here to CBS Sports HQ. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We're looking at running back injuries that we're keeping an eye on heading into week number 2. Joe Mixon, Tevin Coleman both left their respective games with ankle injuries. Reports already in that Tevin Coleman expected to miss multiple weeks with a high ankle sprain. Joe Mixon, we're waiting to find out, and that's going to be big in terms of your waiver wire moves. Darius Geis also dealing with a knee injury, expected to miss some time. We don't know how long, but hopefully he'll be okay soon. If not, Chris Thompson and Adrian Peterson, who was a healthy scratch, will be back in action for week 2 against the Cowboys. So those are the injuries we're keeping an eye on. Here are the guys that I have prioritized as waiver wire additions. You guys may disagree. And as I have said in the waiver wire column, and I said this on our podcast, Giovani Bernard, Chris Thompson, very good in the short term. Thompson may be good in the long term, but he has a hard time staying healthy. If you're taking a more long-term approach, I think Ronald Jones could be the one you want to prioritize, just given that he could be the best running back for Tampa Bay. So a lot of these guys we've talked about over the last several weeks. Some have surprised us a little bit. Malcolm Brown with the 2 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert's going to get an opportunity to get some increased work with the injury to Tevin Coleman. And then some backup running backs that you may just want to stash: Alexander Madison, Ito Smith, Mike Davis. So let's start with the guys at the top. After we go through the drop candidates, these are guys you can consider moving on from: Jordan Howard, Darrell Henderson, Peyton Barber. Kareem Hunt's an easy one. Same with Darwin Thompson, just given their roles. Hunt being suspended for the first 8 games, and Thompson being relegated to the 3rd running back status for the Chiefs. So let's look at the guys to add, starting with Ronald Jones. And if, in fact, he's going to continue to build off what he did in that Week 1 game against San Francisco. 13 carries, 75 yards, passed the eyeball test by leaps and bounds over Peyton Barber, who also averaged over 4 yards per carry. When you look at Ronald Jones, and we know what the struggles were last year, is he somebody that you could pick up and say, I'm going to eventually start him?
The answer to that question is yes, because there's going to be bye weeks and other stuff. Injuries are going to come along. And if you want to have running back depth, and if you missed out on draft day, Ronald Jones is a great get, because I think he will be the best running back in Tampa Bay. But I don't think he'll be the only running back in Tampa Bay, whether he's splitting with Peyton Barber as soon as this Thursday against Carolina, or if 2 weeks from now he's the early downs back and Dario Gumbawale continues to pick up targets, catches, and yards. He won't be a solo act. And I also don't think he's going to be a difference maker in fantasy the way some other running backs could be if they get the chance to do it. So I'm not as excited about him, but I understand that there is long-term appeal, and that's why you should probably spend one of your early waiver claims on him if you're desperate for a running back.
I was one of the Ronald Jones joke makers all offseason. Watching him, I was very impressed in the second half. The first half, he looked a lot like Ronald Jones. And I don't know if that's because Quan Alexander went out. I don't know exactly what the problem was with the San Francisco run defense at that point. My interest in him is determined a lot by whether I need a starter this week.
Yep.
I don't feel comfortable starting Ronald Jones on Thursday night against the Carolina Panthers, but I do think he may have the most upside of any running back on this group. The only question is, like, we don't know how good a running back can be in Tampa Bay.
But we do know how good a running back could be for Bruce Arians.
That's true.
Again, that's, I think, the hope of what Ronald Jones
Right.
is. He's never going to be David Johnson. So don't put that idea in your head. But remember, he got a big season once upon a time out of Rashard Mendenhall when he was discarded from Pittsburgh and went to Arizona. So we could see production from Ronald Jones to the point where he's a flex and he's a potential starter once we get to the bye weeks. And your point is valid. It's what I've been trying to say is that if you need somebody for this week, if Joe Mixon is out, Giovani Bernard is a must-start running back. Chris Thompson, given the circumstances, with or without Darius Geis, is a potential starting running back in PPR. But again, I think, the long-term approach here is Ronald Jones can do this. Now, I don't want to buy into it fully because San Francisco's defense is not going to be very good. They were on the road, and Jones had a good performance. Dave is right. We're going to see multiple guys in this backfield. But I do think that if you're just looking at it from what these guys could be, of all the guys on this list, 16 games of who could be the best, it's probably Ronald Jones. So those are the running back waivers we're looking at. We're also going to spend some time talking about some trade scenarios, as we talk about a lot. Dave does a great job with his trade chart. So we're going to give you a player at each position that could be somebody you're interested in trading, buying low, selling high. In this case, we're talking Marlin Mack, who had an unbelievable performance against the Chargers. 25 carries for 174 yards and a touchdown. No catches. Dave, where's his value at right now in the trade chart?
It's pretty high. He bounced back pretty strong. I liked what I saw from him, but I'm also concerned that there will be some games where he's not even a third as good as what he performed against the Chargers. He'll get a decent amount of work, but he will have some duds in there too. I like him as a number 2 running back rest of season. I've got him graded appropriately in the trade chart. I think he's on the same level as an Austin Eckler in a non-PPR and Calvin Ridley in a PPR. I think those are the types of players that you could get for Marlon Mack in your leagues.
So Heath, you have the scenario of you're the Marlon Mack owner. Would you rather have Austin Eckler moving forward or Calvin Ridley moving forward if you need a wide receiver?
I would much rather have Austin Eckler than either of those two players.
Just Mack.
Okay. I'd rather have Eckler than Mack. I'm really a little bit confused by the whole performance on Sunday. There were 2 very good runs. He also went into halftime with 22 yards on 8 carries and did not see a target in this game. So I want to see more from Mack. He's a low-end number 2, high-end flex for me.
It's going to be interesting to see how he does this week because that Titans defense is no joke, and we'll see if he's able to continue this. The offensive line, it's what I've been saying all along. The offensive line is going to make Marlon Mack look a lot better than probably what he really is, and even without Andrew Luck, that line is going to open a lot of holes and give him this opportunity. But I would like to see a little bit more in the passing game from him. That was one of the storylines we were talking about. Colt said that would happen. Hopefully it's something that we see as the season moves forward. Let's go now from running backs to quarterbacks, and we know you probably don't need to make a quarterback move. I'm not going to say it's time to bail on Jameis Winston. We're going to talk about him coming up in a little bit. Time to bail on Baker Mayfield. But you may need to play a little bit of the streaming game and play the matchups and play the certain situations. And we had some strong performances from some guys that we might not have expected or may not expect moving forward. Josh Allen, good comeback and leading the Bills to a come-from-behind victory against the Jets. Matthew Stafford, Andy Dalton, both with huge games in Week 1. Derek Carr played well against the Broncos. Same thing with Marcus Mariota, and then Jacoby Brissett, Gardner, and Minshew are probably more options for deeper 2-quarterback leagues. Some guys you want to get rid of. Kirk Cousins, if he's only throwing the ball 10 times, I don't think it's going to be very exciting to trust him as a fantasy option. Jimmy Garoppolo, look, as Adam Azer said, if he had the touchdowns that were called back from George Kittle, it may be a different conversation, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a tough matchup for him against the Bengals, and Mitchell Trubisky was awful in Week 1. 3 quarterbacks you may consider dropping for the streaming option. So when we look at the quarterback position here, Josh Allen, great schedule, played well in the comeback against the Jets, ended up with 19 fantasy points. Love the matchup for him against the Giants. I said it before, of the guys on that list, he's the one that I would consider starting this week. Heath, you've been the anti-Josh Allen guy would you trust him as a fantasy starter right now?
He was my third favorite for this week on this list. The second half performance was pretty good. It was interesting. They talked all summer about how he wasn't going to run as much, and then he ends up dropping back and running 10 times. He's got the good connection with John Brown. I actually prefer Andy Dalton, and I prefer Derek Carr. I mean, the Chiefs made Minshew look like an all-pro quarterback. Andy Dalton just threw for 400 yards against the Seahawks, so he's my favorite. Carr would be my second favorite.
Stafford's mine. I was impressed by what I saw in that offense, and really I'm disappointed by what I saw with the run game. And I think the game against the Chargers on Sunday is going to be potentially high scoring. And Stafford's just surrounded by weapons now, so he can really get some good numbers. So I'll take him ahead of Josh Allen, Andy Dalton, Derek Carr, and everybody else. I really think that he's got a decent outlook to finish. I don't have him as a top 12 guy, but just outside of there.
One other thing, you can't use Jacoby Brissett, but he was pretty impressive in his first start against the Chargers. After this week, he has a 3-game stretch. If you stream quarterbacks and you want one for this week and you're thinking about the future, he might be startable week 3, 4, and 5 against the Falcons, Chiefs, and who am I missing, Dave? Raiders. Yeah, so I love Brissett as more of a stash.
And as we know, once we get to week 4 is when the bye weeks start to hit us, so it could be a situation if you're trying to beat the bye weeks, go look at what Jacoby Brissett could do. And look, first start on the road, we'll see if he does better in his second start against the Titans. Bolo wants to know, overreaction to drop Big Ben for Kyler Murray or Matthew Stafford?
I would do it for Murray. He by the time that game was over, he looked like the quarterback I thought he was going to be.
But the problem with this is, I assume if you have been Big Ben, you're thinking about dropping him, and Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford are on the waiver wire. This is a league where people just carry one quarterback.
Yes.
And you're going to drop Big Ben against the Seattle team that should give up 400 yards to Andy Dalton for Kyler Murray traveling to Baltimore. There's no way you want to start Kyler Murray at Baltimore.
No way you're playing Kyler Murray over Ben Roethlisberger this week, or Matthew Stafford. I think Kyler Murray's going to be in for a rude awakening going against that Ravens defense on the road, and Big Ben, as we know at home, tends to play much, much better, especially comparing him to where he plays in New England. Keep Big Ben. Do not bail on him for Kyler Murray. Trade options. Lamar Jackson was a fantastic, unbelievable, wonderful start of the week in week number 1. Great fantasy production for those of you that bought into starting him, and so value may not be any higher than what it is right now. Dave, what's the trade value for Lamar Jackson?
It's not as high as you might think it is because of his position, but he is a top 6 quarterback on the trade chart. The problem is that quarterbacks are severely undervalued because the position is so deep. We just made the case for why Matthew Stafford, Andy Dalton, Ben Roethlisberger, why they're good fantasy starts this week. If there is somebody in your league that really needs a quarterback and you've got Lamar Jackson and another guy, or even if you don't have the other guy, they might pay up a lot more than what the trade chart says. I think he's on the same level as Carson Wentz, who I really like a lot as well as a fantasy quarterback, but just the value is so depressed. James White in a non-PPR, I think that's fair value. Jarvis Landry in a full PPR, fair value.
If this is all I'm getting for him, I'm keeping him.
You might as well, right? Because I would try and go a lot higher than that. If you can't get it, you hold on to him, because after he plays Arizona this week, value's going up again. He's going to be good again this week.
I'm not accepting any of those guys for him. I mean, I think Wentz is fair. That's fine, but I'd rather start Jackson this week, so I'm not going to trade him for a guy that I think might be better later in the year.
It's only Mahomes and Watson at this point. That's where he is. He's in that range. That's how good Lamar Jackson is and can continue to be a great fantasy quarterback. There were some quarterbacks who played well in week number 1, and some we had high expectations for, but didn't necessarily get the job done. Jameis Winston, one of those guys. Not the best performance against the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe taking a little bit of time to grasp the Bruce Arians system. And someone who knows quite a bit about Bruce Arians and how to succeed in this system is going to join us right now here on CBS Sports HQ. Carson Palmer joining us, representing FedEx and the Air and Ground program. Carson, I'm going to talk to you about that program in just a moment, but I want to get your thoughts on Jameis Winston and his debut for Bruce Arians, your former coach, now with Tampa Bay. We had some high expectations for Winston. I'm not going to give up on him yet. I don't think a lot of fantasy players are, but what did you see out of Winston, and really how tough is it to grasp Bruce's system from the get-go?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't give up on him. It obviously was a rough week 1. That's a really tough opponent. That offensive line in Tampa Bay is still in the rebuild mode. There's a lot of kinks to work out up front. And having to go against San Francisco in week 1 with all the pass rushers they have is going to be a tough task. So, you know, it's a new system. It's a fresh year. They're still working out some things up front. They got to get the running game going. But definitely don't give up on him. As he progresses through this system throughout this season, he's still got Mike Evans. He's got some speed, Goodwin on the outside. I think he's going to have a really big year. He's got 2 really good tight ends that can work the middle of the field. So I think you've seen the worst of Jameson. He's going to continuously get better throughout this year.
So you thrived playing for Bruce when you guys were together in Arizona. How long did you feel how long did it take you though to feel comfortable? And then you mentioned the weapons that he has there. How long did it take the guys there that you were playing with, Larry Fitzgerald and whatnot, to also feel comfortable just grasping what Bruce likes to do?
He'll get there eventually. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to be a big difference between week 1 and 2. It's a system that you need repetitions in games. You need a lot of opportunities, a lot of experiences within that system. It is always changing. It is very difficult to grasp for receivers, for running backs, for offensive linemen. So you're going to see some struggles early on this year in Tampa Bay, but once they start really firing and hitting on all cylinders, you're going to see that offense take off and have some really big Sundays with 350-plus passing yards. They're going to be able to run the ball, but it's not going to be an overnight transition into this new system for them.
Well, that's going to be fun to hear if we get those type of numbers, Carson. Going to make a lot of people feel happy about that. I want to go to the situation in Arizona, the quarterback situation there with Kyler Murray. Again, I know a lot of people are going to associate you with the Cardinals. I don't know how much you're following the new coaching staff there with Cliff Kingsbury. Obviously, Kyler Murray getting a lot of attention as the #1 overall pick. How did you see his debut go against Detroit? Didn't get off to a great start the first 3 quarters, but he seemed to pick things up in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, I thought the first 3 quarters of the game he looked like a rookie quarterback, and a rookie quarterback that doesn't have a ton of college experience underneath his belt. You know, he only played a handful of games, a dozen or so games at University of Oklahoma. He played a couple at Texas A&M, but you know, his best football's in front of him, and you saw that. You saw it click in the 4th quarter. The first 3 quarters were really bad football. Just making young rookie mistakes. And then as the game, you know, continuously came to him, he started to feel better and better, you know, feel more confident in the guys around him. And then all of a sudden, the 4th quarter, it's like a light switch turned on. He was hitting deep balls. He found Larry Fitzgerald for 2 big 30-plus plays. Got Larry in the end zone on a short one down near the goal line. So, you know, there's a reason he was the #1 pick, and you saw that unfold in the 4th quarter. But for the first 3 quarters of that game, he was really trying to find his rhythm and really wasn't comfortable.
Is the light switch just going to Larry Fitzgerald, a guy that you leaned on quite a bit? I mean, is it kind of just amazing to you how he's continuing to get the job done, over 100 yards again, finding the end zone? I mean, it looked like he was just rejuvenated in that 4th quarter.
Yeah, he looked great. I mean, he looked like Larry in 2006 and 2009. I mean, he's ageless. You know, for him to open up, you know, he's a slot receiver now. For him to open up week 1 with 113 yards and a touchdown, you're going to see it week in, week out, especially for a young quarterback. I mean, Kyler does not have a ton of guys around him to throw the ball. He does have Larry, and as you see him play this year, he's going to get more and more comfortable with Larry, where to put the ball for Larry in jump ball type situations. You saw him throw up 2 big balls, one on 3rd down for a 30-plus, you know, 35-yard gain and then a 43-yard gain. So he's trying to really figure out Larry in-game situations, and he's going to get more and more comfortable as the season progresses.
It looks like the same thing with David Johnson as well, and David Johnson may be somebody you consider voting for the Air and Ground program from FedEx. Tell us about what you're doing for FedEx and how fans can get involved with this program.
Yeah, the FedEx Air and Ground program kicks off today. You can vote today. The voting closes Thursday. You can vote for your favorite player through the air for the week and your favorite player on the ground for the week. I personally thought what Dak Prescott did in Dallas was amazing. I also thought Marlin Mack in Indianapolis in week 1 with 170-plus yards on the ground was spectacular. So you can log on and vote right now on FedEx, on FedEx's Twitter page, on the NFL Twitter page, excuse me. You can also vote on NFL.com/FedEx. And what FedEx is doing is donating $2,000 per week per winner to the USO program. And the USO program helps transition our military service men and women that recently retired from serving our country into civilian life. So it's a great program. Log on and vote now. You can vote, like I said, between now and Thursday on the NFL Twitter page. You can also vote on NFL.com/FedEx. It's a great program, and it's a great way to stay involved and vote for your favorite players week in, week out.
Yes, and on the NFL Twitter page as well as on Twitter, you can join the conversation using the hashtag Air and Ground. And again, as Carson said, NFL.com FedEx. Carson, we appreciate you taking the time to join us, and thank you for making people feel a little bit better about Jameis Winston and Kyler Murray after their Week 1 debuts.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome back to Fantasy Football. Today, I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. Some news coming in CBS Sports HQ about Steelers wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster expected to play in Sunday's game against Seattle. Suffered a toe injury in the Week 1 loss against the Patriots. Mike Tomlin said they're going to limit him in practice, but optimistic that he's going to be fine. A must-start fantasy receiver as long as he's on the field and 100%. So here's a look at some of the other injuries that we're keeping an eye on here leading into week number 2 at the wide receiver spot. Tyreek Hill's collarbone injury going to keep him out for several weeks, unfortunately. We'll find out the status of Mike Williams and Sterling Shepard. Williams dealing with a knee injury, Shepard in the concussion protocol, and Devin Funchess has been placed on IR designated to return with a broken collarbone as well. The collarbone injury ruining a lot of teams and some fantasy rosters as well. Here's a priority list. Again, this is according to me, so if you don't like it, yell at me. Don't yell at Dave or Heath or anybody else. But I like John Brown the best, followed by Jameson Crowder. And then we get into the younger receivers and seeing how they're all going to perform. Marquis Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, A.J. Brown, Mecole Hardman, all rookies. Hardman on this list because hopefully he gets a boost with the Tyreek Hill injury. A couple PPR options you may want to consider in Danny Amendola and Cole Beasley. And so these are the guys that we're looking at as we cycle through. It's a lot of wide receivers for week number 1. That typically happens as you're looking at some of your waiver moves. We'll see if the Jaguars receivers and Chark and Conley can build off their strong performance in week 1. And maybe if you're in a desperate situation, you'll look at the Dolphins receivers. Some guys you want to consider dropping. Again, you don't have to. Just some guys you might want to move on from if you're looking at some of these other guys. Corey Davis, Dante Pettis, Dante Moncrief, Geronimo Allison all had disappointing performances in week number 1. I look at guys typically that are above the threshold that we talk about, so you're probably going to move on from guys like Anthony Miller or running backs like Kalen Ballage. It's easy to cut those guys. These are guys that could be a little bit tougher decisions, and I know Heath is not going to cut Corey Davis. Probably not a lot of people are, or Dante Pettis, but again, you may want to move on just to be at somebody that could have a little bit more of a higher ceiling. So let's talk about some of these receivers specifically. Let's look at John Brown and Jamison Crowder. PPR leagues more so for Crowder than non-PPR. How excited are you about these two guys?
I'm excited more so about Brown than I am for Crowder. And this is what I was seeing from the Bills coming into the year. He's their number 1 guy. And he's going to get used inside, outside, deep, shallow. And he's going to get a lot of targets. He had 10 targets in week 1, caught 7 of them. I think he can keep this up for at least the first half of the season. So if you need a number 3 receiver that can carry you for several weeks, we've talked about how good this Bills schedule is, and we've talked about how Josh Allen, once he got to the second half, he settled down and played a lot better football. John Brown's the one to get. Now, Crowder in PPR, I totally get it. He had 17 targets. He caught 14 of them. Holy moly, that's a lot of catches. But I think he can get 7-8 balls a week. It's what he does with them that matters the most. That's why he's only a good at in PPR, but I'd rather still have Brown.
Oh, it's not. These guys are not in the same universe. I don't understand why John Brown wasn't drafted in every league.
Yeah.
We told you to draft him in every league. John Brown will be a top 25 wide receiver for the rest of the season. Crowder's just like, the difference is we want John Brown to be good. We're excited about having him on our team. We wish Jameson Crowder and this type of performance didn't exist because we want the ball to go to Robbie Anderson. But this was the Jarvis Landry role in Miami, and he just out Jarvis Landry, the first player ever with 14 catches and fewer than 100 yards in a game. I don't want him to be this good. I don't think he'll catch 14 games again all year, but he's going to be a top 30 wide receiver in PPR for me as long as he's getting this type of volume share.
If he's healthy for 16 games, he's going over 100 catches. I mean, there's no doubt about it given what we saw in week 1 and what Adam Gase, like you said, his track record in Miami is. So we'll see if these two guys can sustain it, and hopefully if you are buying into them, they will. And you may be buying into Marquis Brown as well, and you guys have a lot of questions about him. David wants to know how much of a $100 FAAB budget would you spend on Hollywood Brown, who had 4 catches for 147 yards and 2 touchdowns on only 5 targets. But David lost Tyreek Hill for at least a few weeks. So if you can't get Brown, you can't get Crowder. I think Marquise Brown is among the next guys you should be considering. How much would you spend on him?
I would put Brown, Metcalf, and Terry McLaurin kind of all in the same grouping. Brown is my favorite. He's the only one because of the great matchup this week that I'd feel comfortable as possibly starting as a flex. I still wouldn't go into the double digits for one of these wide receivers.
10% maybe.
Yeah,
top.
yeah. Like I'm thinking 7, 8, 9%. And you're probably not going to get him for that, but there are going to be a lot of wide receivers.
Oh, if you miss on him,
big days,
John Ross has played great every time A.J. Green, or been productive every time A.J. Green has been out. McLaurin, like you said, you could get by with Ted Ginn, as we talked about. There are a lot of receivers that can help you in the interim before Tyreek Hill comes back, and maybe we even see Mecole Hardman step up. But we know Sammy Watkins is going to be very good without Tyreek Hill there. And so we're looking at, again, some guys that you could be considering trading for or trading away. Which side of those things is Watkins on, Dave?
He's getting close to top 12 value right away, and it's just because of the pedigree of this Chiefs offense and the likelihood that he can be a major contributor for the next, call it 4 weeks, and then still a good number 3 receiver after that. So I think his value is pretty high. If you wanted to trade him straight up for Brandon Cooks, I wouldn't fault you for it. I think he can be more consistent. And Devontae Freeman, in all formats, I was disappointed in what I saw from Freeman in week 1. It was his toughest matchup of the year. I'm not sure he's going to be a dominant running back very often this season. So if I needed a wide receiver, I would give up Freeman to get Sammy Watkins.
He's in that range now without Tyreek Hill there. It could be a short-term situation, but in that short term, as we saw, could just be absolutely awesome. Let's move now from the wide receiver talk to the tight ends. Not a lot of great options to be picking up on waivers, but here are some guys you may need to replace. Jordan Reed, as we know, missed week 1 with a concussion. Greg Olsen missing practice again on Tuesday with a back injury, and Trey Burton did not play in week 1 with the groin injury. So these are tight ends that you may have to deal with having another player to start in their place. Darren Waller was awesome, as we told you, in week 1 against the Broncos, 7 for 70 on 8 targets. Looks legit. Good job, Dave Richard. Vernon Davis was great in place of Jordan Reed. Good job, Heath Cummings. Again, you could look at Olsen. Hopefully he's healthy. Good matchup against Tampa Bay on Thursday night. And Jimmy Graham, 3 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown in his week 1 debut against the Bears. Guys that you can consider dropping, Eric Ebron could have had a touchdown, but he dropped it. May have been a bad call, who knows, but did not score. Jordan Reed, again, if you don't want to continue to deal with the concussion situation. And if the Vikings are not throwing, Kyle Rudolph is not catching, so you can get rid of him and his 59% ownership. Look for somebody else off of waivers. So not a lot to really talk about with these guys. Waller's going to be great, and if you need some of these other guys, Vernon Davis, if in fact Jordan Reed's out. But a lot of people want to know how much money they should spend on the guys that might be available, and we're talking probably more to 10-team leagues with guys like TJ Hockenson and Austin Hooper and Mark Andrews. They're above the 65% threshold that we typically talk about. So we have a question here in regard to Hockenson and what to spend on him. And I guess really not a question from Twitter, more of what we should spend on Hockenson if he's available in a 10-team league.
I would back up the Brinks truck on him. I was really impressed with him coming into the year. I was super impressed from what I saw in week 1. I think that he is worth at least 30% of your FAAB. It's a lot, but he's really good, and this Lions team should be pass-friendly, a little bit more pass-friendly than we believed. I would go a little bit less on Mark Andrews. I know he had a great game. I still have a hard time with the snap count that he has from week to week. I wish he were an every down player. And there are going to be a lot of other options in there in that offense as they move along. Brown's going to play more. Miles Boykin, who in deeper leagues is not a bad guy to think about adding off of waivers, he's going to get more targets as well. So I would probably say around 30% for Hockenson and probably almost 20% for Mark Andrews.
If you're in a 10-team league, there are 6 teams that are definitely fine at tight end. There are 4 other guys on this list. I'm not going near that high because I don't really care which of them I have. I'm okay with starting Delaney Walker. I'm okay with starting Hockenson, Andrews. Waller's not even on the list. I'd probably put in a bid for one of them at like 6%, and I'd go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for all the others. I don't think they're all getting added in a 10-team league.
They might, though. And
if they do, they're dropping somebody that's started.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there are 10-team leagues that have 6 or 7 roster spots on their bench. It just depends on the format. You're right, though, Heath. I mean, if there are these other guys, it's just a matter of Hockenson has what could be top 5 upside rest of way.
Exactly.
But it's an if. It's still a rookie tight end that took advantage of a great matchup against a bad defense for the Cardinals. He has a good matchup this week without Derwin James there for the Chargers, so we'll see if he can keep it up, but you may not want to miss that. All right, when we come back, we're going to get into your questions. Thank you for sending them to us at FF Today on Twitter. I'll tease you with this one. Rick wants to know, do you think Antonio Brown is worth starting next week, meaning week 2, or would Devin Singletary or David Montgomery be better since Singletary did well and could take more snaps? Find out what our answer is to that and more when we come back on CBS Sports HQ. Welcome back to Fantasy Football today, giving you some options to add at DST and kicker for this week. Texans good matchup against Gardner Minshew and the Jaguars offense. Titans get the Colts, and we'll see how they do in Jacoby Brissett's second start. Panthers get Tampa Bay and Jameis Winston if he's still going to vomit all over himself and throw some interceptions. Some kicker options for you. You might be considering adding as streamers Cairo Santos kicking indoors against the Colts, Mason Crosby kicking it home against the Vikings, and Matt Bryant kicking it home against the Eagles. All favorable setups for these three kickers. All right, so we're answering your questions here. And like we teased at the break, questions about Antonio Brown. Do you think Antonio Brown is worth starting next week, or would Devin Singletary or David Montgomery be better? Which way are you going with that?
I'm going with Antonio Brown, and that's assuming that he's active and ready to go for the Patriots, and we should know that before kickoff. He's playing the Dolphins. They are terrible. He's got glorious upside compared to Singletary and Montgomery.
I would start both of these running backs over Brown.
Wow.
I
It's a
don't know
wild
that
card.
he plays more than 20 snaps.
It is an absolute wild card.
We just saw
It's an
a
absolute
different
wild card, and we'll find out what's going to happen this week. Bill Belichick said on a conference call today they're going to take it day by day in regards to Antonio Brown's playing status for this week. According to Belichick, we haven't practiced yet. We're going through information with him like we would any new player. Get out on the practice field, and after Wednesday, we'll talk about Thursday and see how it goes. He also was asked how they're going to deal with Brown and some of his off-field antics. And Belichick said it's the same thing you guys said about Randy Moss when we brought him in. So it is no guarantee that Antonio Brown plays in week number 2 at Miami. If he does, you're starting him. Depends on who you're comparing him to. As he said, he'll start the running backs. Dave will go with Antonio Brown. I think I would probably lean toward Brown if he plays, just because Miami is so bad defensively that one play can make your fantasy week. Couple more questions that we'll get here too. Skylar wants to know, I have Josh Gordon in 2 leagues. I am concerned with his low targets in week 1, and now with Brown coming on board, what can we expect from Josh Gordon moving forward?
Mid-range number 3 wide receiver, better as a flex.
Next question comes to us from Michael wants to know, who's the top waiver priority in my leagues? I'm eyeing TJ Hockenson or Marquis Brown.
Lucky you.
I assume it's
Hockenson
Marquis
is
Brown and
there.
not Malcolm Brown.
Right. Marquis Brown would be second for me. Hockenson, if you can get him, do it.
I think it depends on position need. If I need a receiver, I'll go Brown. If you just need best player, you go Hockenson. Next question, from Steve Smith. I don't think it's the receiver, although he does play fantasy. What do you predict for Matt Breida while Tevin Coleman is hurt?
It will still be a timeshare, but he leads the team in carries and in fantasy points. I've got him for 12 this week in non-PPR. He's more of a flex in PPR.
This would have been a fun question if it was in regard to DJ Moore. Steve Smith likes picking on DJ Moore about his fantasy outlooks. We have you covered all the time, Monday through Friday, noon Eastern, and Sunday, 3 hours. It's the pregame bonanza. Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern, but we will be back here tomorrow answering all of your fantasy questions, getting you ready for week number 2. Good luck waiver wiring. For Heath, for Dave, I'm Jamie. It's going to be fun. Spend those $5 if you need it. Coming up next, Tommy Tran, more on the latest in the NFL.